If you've ever wondered what a man is really thinking about you, here's a secret. You're most likely to find the truth when he's had a few drinks. Why? Because alcohol doesn't just make people laugh louder or dance crazier. It lowers their guard, it quiets the filter, and it lets hidden feelings slip out. And if you know the right questions to ask in that moment, you can uncover more about his heart than you ever could in a sober conversation. When someone has had a few drinks, something interesting happens to their personality and their behavior. Alcohol lowers inhibitions, and in plain words, that means it takes down the invisible wall that people normally build around themselves to look a certain way, to sound composed, and to protect their feelings. You know how most of us walk around in daily life with a little mask on, making sure we don't say the wrong thing, making sure we don't look too vulnerable, and trying to present the best version of ourselves. Well, when someone is drunk, that mask starts to slip, and what you're left with is a much rawer, less polished version of who they really are. That's why so many people describe alcohol as something that brings out the truth. It doesn't necessarily create new thoughts or feelings. It just removes the filter that normally keeps those thoughts hidden. When a man is sober, he might carefully choose his words, maybe even overthink before answering a question, because he doesn't want to come across as too attached, too emotional, or even too serious about what he's feeling. But when he's drunk, those carefully chosen words often disappear, and what comes out is unfiltered. If he has feelings for you that he's been holding back, they're much more likely to spill out in the middle of a conversation when his guard is down. If he has doubts or frustrations, those too can surface without him even realizing how revealing he's being. The alcohol doesn't change the core of who he is. It just unlocks the door he usually keeps locked. Think about it like this. When you speak to someone who's fully guarded, you're not really speaking to them. You're speaking to their representative, the version of themselves they want you to see. But when they're tipsy or drunk, you're speaking to the raw, unfiltered person who doesn't have the same energy to keep up appearances. Suddenly, instead of rehearsed lines or carefully structured stories, you might get confessions, honest feelings, or even spontaneous expressions of love, anger, or desire. This is why asking the right questions in that state can be powerful. You're catching someone in a rare window where they're not hiding behind social rules or personal defense mechanisms. This doesn't mean everything said while drunk is gold or absolute truth. Alcohol can also make people exaggerate or blur details, but the emotions behind their words are usually much harder to fake. For instance, if a guy tells you he misses you or that he cares about you deeply while drunk, chances are that's something he's felt before but didn't dare to say out loud when sober. The lowered inhibitions remove the fear of rejection, the fear of looking weak, or the fear of committing too much too soon. On the flip side, if he voices frustrations or says things that sting, those may also be feelings he's buried when sober because he doesn't want to start conflict. The truth often comes out not in the exact words, but in the emotion behind them. Lowered inhibitions are why some people dance freely at parties when they normally wouldn't, why others tell stories they'd never share, and why secrets slip out after a few too many drinks. It's not that the alcohol planted those behaviors or words in them, it's that it stripped away the fear of judgment. When that fear is gone, what you get is raw honesty. And if you know how to listen carefully and ask the right questions, you can uncover insights about how someone really feels about you, about themselves, and about the relationship. People often underestimate just how much the truth slips out when someone is drunk. Think about the way most of us operate in everyday life. We're constantly editing ourselves. We pause before saying something, we carefully select the right words, and sometimes we even swallow our feelings entirely because we don't want to risk being misunderstood, rejected, or judged. But when alcohol enters the system, those little sensors in the brain start to relax. It's as though the security guards that normally patrol the entrance to your true thoughts get a little drowsy, and suddenly the things that were once locked up behind your lips begin to slip through without warning. That's why people say things while drunk that they would never dream of saying sober, not because those thoughts weren't there before, but because the barrier keeping them hidden has been weakened. This is especially true in situations where emotions are involved. A man might be too shy to admit he's scared of losing you when he's sober, but a few drinks in, and that fear comes spilling out in words, maybe even in an emotional outburst. The truth is, alcohol doesn't make people create new feelings out of thin air. What it does is give them the courage to express feelings that were always there, but kept neatly tucked away. The compliments he's been wanting to say, the frustrations he's been holding back, or the affection he's been too proud to express. All of these have a way of surfacing when he's not in total control of his filter. It's like pressing play on a playlist that was always queued up but never allowed to start. The interesting thing is that the truth often sneaks out in small ways, not always in some grand, dramatic confession. It could be a passing comment, a slip of the tongue, or even the way he reacts emotionally when asked a direct question. A man who has been pretending not to care might suddenly reveal how much he actually thinks about you. A man who's been brushing off deeper conversations might suddenly go into detail about his fears, his goals, or his regrets. It's these little leaks of honesty that, when pieced together, give you a much clearer picture of who he is and how he feels. They're the moments where you stop guessing and start seeing what's really there beneath the surface. Another important thing to notice is that the truth that slips out while drunk often comes with more emotion than you would expect. This is because alcohol doesn't just relax the logical part of the brain, it heightens the emotional side. So if he tells you he misses you, it might not come out in a calm, measured tone. It might come out in a way that's emotional, maybe even desperate, because he's not only expressing the thought, but also the feeling behind it. And feelings, once released, tend to reveal a deeper layer of truth than carefully crafted words ever could. This doesn't mean you should take every single thing at face value, because alcohol can also exaggerate feelings in the moment, but exaggeration is usually built on something real. For example, if he tells you he loves you in a slightly over-the-top way while drunk, the exaggeration might be fueled by alcohol, but the seed of that statement, the fact that he does care for you deeply, was likely always there. In contrast, if he says something that seems harsh, it might be the frustration he's been carrying finally finding a way out. The key is to pay attention to the themes of what he's saying. Even if the delivery is a little messy, the underlying message often points toward how he truly feels. That's why asking the right questions while he's in this state can be powerful. You're not manipulating him, you're just giving space for the truth to surface without the usual barriers. It's like catching a glimpse of the raw, unpolished version of his heart, the one that doesn't care about appearances or timing. And those moments, as fleeting as they may seem, can give you more clarity about where you stand with him than weeks of carefully constructed conversations ever could. Asking the right questions matters more than anything else in this kind of situation, because it's not enough just to catch someone when their guard is down. You need to guide the conversation in a way that reveals what you actually want to know. When a person is drunk, they may talk freely, but without direction. That freedom of speech can drift into meaningless chatter or exaggerated stories. If you want to uncover what's real, what's hidden, and what's important, you have to be intentional about what you ask. The right questions act like keys, and each one unlocks a door to something deeper about how he feels, what he values, and what he's afraid to admit when sober. It's not about interrogation, it's about curiosity and connection, and if you approach it with care, the answers can tell you more than hours of surface-level conversations ever could. The beauty of asking the right questions is that it puts you in control of what you learn. A man who's had a few drinks may be open, but that doesn't mean he's automatically going to pour out the truths you're looking for. He may ramble about his friends, complain about work, or go on about the past. And while those things may be interesting, they're not necessarily helpful in understanding his feelings for you or his deeper intentions. But when you step in with a carefully chosen question, you give his unfiltered mind a direction to flow in. It's like turning a faucet. The water was already there, but you control where it comes out. For example, if you ask him something simple like, "What do you really want in a relationship?" In a sober moment, he might give you a safe, polite answer, something he's repeated before, or something he thinks will sound good. But when you ask that same question while he's had a few drinks, his response is less likely to be polished. He might let slip what he's afraid of, what he craves, or even what he's missing right now. And those kinds of truths are invaluable because they give you insight into how he truly views love, commitment, and connection. That kind of answer might not come out at all unless you created the space with the right question. The art of asking questions also lies in the balance between directness and playfulness. When someone is drunk, they're more likely to answer honestly, but they're also more likely to drift or get defensive if the question feels like an attack. That's why the way you frame it matters. Instead of asking in a harsh or confrontational tone, you can make it light, almost like a game, and that lowers his resistance even further. A playful, "So tell me, who do you really think about when you're alone?" can feel like a joke, but it often produces a more revealing answer than a serious interrogation. The trick is to make the question feel safe while still aiming at the truth. Another reason the right questions matter is that they help you separate noise from meaning. Alcohol makes people talk more, but not everything that comes out is useful. If you don't guide the conversation, you may end up with a lot of empty words, exaggerations, or irrelevant stories. But when you direct the energy towards specific topics, you filter out the nonsense and get closer to the core of who he really is. You're not just passively listening, you're shaping the conversation into something that actually gives you clarity. Ultimately, the right questions are like a mirror. They reflect back the emotions and intentions that a man has been carrying but hasn't fully expressed. You're not forcing him to feel something he doesn't. You're simply creating the conditions where he feels free enough to let it out. And because alcohol has already loosened his tongue and softened his defenses, your questions land more deeply, pulling out truths that he might normally guard closely. When you understand the power of asking with intention, you stop waiting for chance confessions and start guiding conversations toward the truths that matter most. There is an old saying that drunk words are sober thoughts, and while it may sound like just a catchy phrase, there is a lot of truth behind it. When a man has been drinking, what often comes out of his mouth is not brand new information created by alcohol, but rather feelings and thoughts that were already living inside him, just hidden. Alcohol has this way of turning down the volume on the inner critic that tells us to stay quiet, to hold back, or to avoid vulnerability. So when his inhibitions are lowered, the words that spill out are usually the ones he's been carrying in silence. It might be affection, it might be frustration, or it might be his true intentions about you and the relationship, but in most cases, it's not random. It's something that's been waiting to come to the surface. Think about how often people hesitate to say what they really mean when sober. A man might stop himself from saying, "I miss you," because he doesn't want to look needy, or he might bite back, "I love you," because he doesn't want to move too fast. He could be holding back a compliment, a confession, or even a fear, all because his sober mind is wired to protect him from risk. But when he's had a drink or two, that careful filter doesn't operate the same way. His guard relaxes relaxes, his emotions come forward, and suddenly those same words that felt too risky before slip out as if they've been trying to escape all along. That's why people so often admit things while drunk that they later say they didn't mean. The truth is, they probably did mean it. They just wouldn't have said it if their walls were still up. What's even more powerful is the emotional weight behind drunk words. Alcohol doesn't just open the mouth, it amplifies whatever feelings are underneath. So if he tells you he cares about you when he's drunk, he might say it in a way that's unfiltered, raw, and overflowing with emotion. That kind of delivery might not be polished, but it makes the words feel real. In the same way, if he voices frustration or disappointment, the intensity behind it often points to how strongly he has been feeling it all along. The words may be louder or less graceful, but the underlying thought is usually honest. This is why it's important not just to hear the words themselves, but to understand the spirit behind them. Drunk words are sober thoughts, means you should look beyond the sloppy phrasing or the exaggeration and ask yourself, what is the emotion driving this statement? If he says he's jealous, even in a joking or dramatic way, it's because some part of him really does worry about losing you. If he tells you he wants you around more often, it's because deep down he's been feeling your absence. Alcohol just gave him the courage to let it out. Of course, not everything said while drunk is absolute truth. Sometimes alcohol adds dramatic flair or exaggeration, but even exaggeration usually has a seed of truth. If he suddenly tells you he wants to marry you tomorrow, maybe the timeline is unrealistic, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. It likely reflects that somewhere in his heart, he sees you as someone he could imagine a future with. The exaggeration is alcohol's doing, but the core idea often comes straight from his sober thoughts. The beauty of this saying lies in its ability to remind you that what you're hearing in those unguarded moments matters. You get a glimpse of the version of him that doesn't calculate every word. You hear the feelings that he edits out when he's sober, and while you may need to sift through some noise, the gems of truth are there if you listen closely. Drunk words, more often than not, are sober thoughts finally brave enough to be spoken out loud. When it comes to figuring out the truth from someone who has been drinking, one of the most important things to pay attention to is consistency. Words by themselves can sound convincing, but words that line up with actions and repeat across different situations are the ones that carry real weight. A man who is drunk might say things he has been holding back, but you should always ask yourself if those words align with what he has shown you when sober. If his late night confessions match the way he treats you in the daylight, then you can trust you are closer to uncovering his genuine feelings. But if what he says under the influence doesn't match his sober behavior, that gap reveals something important too. It shows you where the cracks are between what he says and what he actually does. Consistency is like the backbone of truth. Anyone can make a grand confession after a few drinks, but not everyone can follow it up when the alcohol wears off and reality sets in. For example, if he tells you when drunk that you're the person he thinks about most, ask yourself, does he reach out to you during the week? Does he make an effort to include you in his plans? Does he show signs of care when there's no alcohol in his system? If the answer is yes, then what he said while drunk was likely the honest truth, spoken with less fear and more rawness. If the answer is no, then his words might have been more about the mood of the moment rather than his deeper intentions. The reason consistency matters is because alcohol doesn't just loosen tongues, it also creates exaggeration. Someone may confess something that feels powerful, but if it's out of character and has no supporting evidence in sober life, then you have to be cautious about taking it at face value. A man might declare his love when drunk, but if he acts distant and detached when sober, then those words were probably fueled more by temporary emotion than by lasting truth. On the other hand, if his drunk words about caring for you match his sober behavior, then the alcohol simply gave you a glimpse of what he already feels. In that case, you can see the overlap between his heart and his actions, and that overlap is where the truth lives. Consistency also gives you peace of mind because it removes the confusion of mixed signals. Without looking for consistency, it's easy to get caught up in what someone said in a blurry, emotional moment and then spend days wondering if they really meant it. But when you measure those words against how he behaves when the buzz has worn off, the picture becomes much clearer. If he's consistent, you can relax knowing his feelings are real. If he's inconsistent, then you've learned something equally valuable, that his words don't carry as much meaning as his actions. Either way, you win because you've discovered the reality rather than clinging to illusions. This is why your role is not just to listen, but also to observe. The truth is not in one drunk conversation, it's in the pattern over time. If he tells you he's serious about you while drunk and then shows up for you in everyday life, prioritizes you and treats you with respect, then you've uncovered something real. If he only makes those claims under the influence but disappears when sober, then you've uncovered another truth, that his words are shallow without the backbone of consistency. In the end, consistency is the difference between hearing something that feels good in the moment and knowing something that you can actually rely on. When his drunk words align with his sober actions, that's when you can truly believe him. And if they don't, then the inconsistency itself is a message you shouldn't ignore, because it tells you everything you need to know about where you stand. Not everything a man says while drunk should be taken at face value, and that's where your ability to filter comes in. Alcohol is a strange thing. On one hand, it lowers defenses and makes people speak more freely, but on the other, it can also push them into exaggeration, mood swings, or dramatics that don't reflect the full picture. That's why it's important to listen carefully, not just to the exact words, but to the meaning behind them, and then weigh those words against what you already know to be true about him. The job isn't to cling to every single statement as if it were a sacred truth, but to separate the emotion that feels genuine from the noise that comes from alcohol's influence. When someone is drunk, their feelings often come out louder and more intense than they would otherwise. That intensity doesn't mean it's fake, but it does mean you need to step back and look at the core message. For instance, if he tells you he loves you 10 times in one night, it doesn't mean he's suddenly 10 times more in love. It means the emotion of love that was already inside him has been magnified and spilled over. If he complains about something in an exaggerated way, the complaint might still be real, but alcohol made it sound harsher or more dramatic than he intended. The trick is to listen for the seed of truth buried in the exaggeration and not get carried away by the excess. Another thing to remember is that alcohol can blur lines between real desire and temporary impulse. A man who says he wants to marry you tomorrow while drunk may not literally mean tomorrow, but he may be revealing that deep down, he does imagine a future with you. A man who says he doesn't care about something important may not mean he doesn't care at all. It may be alcohol fueling a careless outburst. This is where your judgment matters. Look at his patterns, his actions, and his sober words. If his drunk statements align with those, then you're seeing truth spoken without a filter. If they contradict everything you've seen, then it's more likely the alcohol exaggerating a fleeting emotion. Filtering also means protecting yourself emotionally. If you take every drunk word as gospel, you risk being hurt when he sobers up and acts differently. But if you approach it with wisdom, you can appreciate the honesty in his emotions without becoming dependent on them. You can use his drunk words as clues rather than conclusions. They are hints about what's in his heart, but they're not the full story until you see them backed up in real life. This mindset keeps you grounded and allows you to benefit from the truths alcohol reveals without getting lost in illusions. It's also worth noting that sometimes drunk words are not about you at all, but about his own inner struggles. Alcohol can bring hidden fears, insecurities, or regrets to the surface, and while those words may be messy, they are still valuable pieces of information. If he admits he's scared of commitment or that he worries he's not good enough for you, those are truths worth paying attention to. But again, don't take them as permanent verdicts. People can work through fears, and insecurities can shift over time. What matters is that alcohol gave you a glimpse of what he wrestles with deep inside. So the way to handle this is with balance. Listen carefully, take note of the recurring themes, and hold on to the parts that align with who he shows you he is when sober. Discard the obvious exaggerations, the drunken dramatics, and the words that don't match his actions. By doing this, you protect yourself from false promises while still gaining the clarity that comes when alcohol strips someone of their filter. Drunk words do reveal truth, but only if you learn how to separate the valuable confessions from the noise. Filtering wisely means you don't fall for illusions, but you also don't miss out on the deeper insights hiding beneath the surface. When you put all of this together, the picture becomes clear. A man's drunk words are not random noise. They're pieces of a puzzle that show you who he really is beneath the mask. Alcohol lowers his inhibitions. It lets the truth slip out. And with the right questions, you can guide those unguarded moments to reveal what matters most. His words may come out messy, emotional, or even exaggerated. But if you listen carefully, look for consistency, and filter out the excess, you'll uncover the truths that shape how he feels and what he wants. The key is not to hang on every sentence as if it's a promise, but to use these moments as a window into his heart. In those late night conversations, when the guard is down and the emotions are high, you get to see the version of him that doesn't overthink, doesn't strategize, and doesn't hide. You see the man who feels instead of the man who edits. That's where the honesty lives. And if you're wise enough to hear it, not with blind faith, but with careful attention, you'll walk away knowing far more than you would from weeks of guarded, polite conversations. The truth isn't always clean, and it isn't always easy to hear, but when it comes out, it gives you the clarity you need to make decisions about your relationship, your future, and your worth. In the end, asking him the right questions when he's drunk is not about manipulation or games. It's about seeing past the walls he builds and getting closer to the raw, unpolished version of his heart. And once you've seen that, you can never unsee it. That truth, even in its imperfect delivery, is what allows you to move forward with certainty, because now you know what's real.